Chapter 9. Razzir. Mr. Bates drove the three students to an old building near the northern end of Heaford. 15 years ago it had been a popular YMCA building, and now it was a derelict. Just down the street was the elementary school where Oliver had gone in his younger years. A massive field of tall grass was out behind the building, and a pharmacy on the other side across the street. Mr. Bates pressed a button on his garage door opener, and the old grimy door lifted up. He pulled in, and Selina grew stiff and tense next to Oliver in the back seat, but he let them out in a wide-open, dimly lit space, a large concrete garage and storage room. A cart of old basketballs sat next to the door at the far end. When Mr. Bates had parked his car over on the other side, he beckoned Rory over to the trunk and opened it. Selina flinched, and Oliver wondered why Mr. Bates had wanted Rory to come over to open the trunk, but instead he handed Rory a large plastic bin, then took a second one out himself. "Oliver, the door, if you please," he said, and Oliver opened the door at the far end, letting them all in. They had entered a large gymnasium, and the daylight shone through the hazy windows down at the other end. Selina found the light switches and flipped them. The loud snap and hum of the enormous ceiling lights accompanied them as they slowly brightened, and Mr. Bates opened the bins. Rory hollered with joy when he started to pull out all sorts of sci-fi-looking tech devices, similar to the ones on the walls in the training room of the cathedral, but also larger, newer ones they hadn't seen yet. There were quite a few bright blades in the mix as well, real ones mixed in with the practice ones that Mr. Bates had to sort through before allowing their use. Rory picked up a gun-like contraption, and Mr. Bates made sure it was aimed elsewhere as he spoke. "Oliver, you have only a single weekend of training, so I will start at the beginning." "Do I call you Dominus now?" "No. If you accept my tutelage, I am your Taiki. It is the vice word for master." "What if I don't want to be vice?" "Then you may return to Dominus Holly and train exclusively with her." "That's it? Just decide and walk out?" "Of course," said Mr. Bates. "But you'll receive no further help from me until you change your mind." "What if I don't change my mind?" Mr. Bates smiled. "After enough Venator assassins have tried to snuff out your life, you will. It benefits you far more to be trained as both Veros and Vice, though, in my opinion, the Vice have more to offer." Oliver took a seat on the metal bleachers and thought about it while Mr. Bates redirected the muzzle of Rory's gun yet again, then thought better of it and simply took it away from him. "Mr. Bates, you said you were a former Veros and Vice. What happened? Why did you leave them?" "Will it affect your decision to stay if I tell you?" Oliver glanced at Selina, who nodded. She looked very uncomfortable and was watching Mr. Bates like a hawk. Oliver didn't know why. Mr. Bates had been nothing but helpful, and Oliver respected a man who was willing to go his own way. If Selina hadn't been there, Oliver might have let it go, but, well, if Oliver was to train in all the potentials, he was going to have to try to keep everyone as happy as he could. "Why does no one know whose side you're on?" he asked. Mr. Bates sighed. "Oliver, I am on your side. Do you believe that?" Oliver nodded because he did truly believe it. With everything he sensed, it seemed to fit and be the right call. "Then I will tell you only that I was kicked out of the Veros as apostata by my former elder, and I left the Vice of my own accord and made myself Dethieri when I no longer wished to submit to my Kaidat. I have connections to both, am respected by many, and I serve neither side fully while serving the greater good exclusively. If you remain with me, you will eventually discover those interests and find they are yours as well. I will never lie to you, but I will not tell you the entire truth right away, because you are not ready for it, and you would not believe it. But I will tell you as much as I can as it comes. Is that enough for you?" Oliver looked at both Selina and Rory. Rory shrugged, and Selina sighed and sat down next to Oliver on the bleachers. "I don't know, Ollie." "He's not lying, Selina," Oliver pointed out. "And I have to learn from someone. If he's my Taiki, at least he can protect me." "No one has ever had a Taiki and a Dominus at the same time." Oliver shrugged. "Maybe I'm different." At this, Mr. Bates smiled. If Oliver had been trained more precisely with the vigor, he could have detected the goosebumps on Bates's arms. Oliver stood and walked over to Mr. Bates. Bates reached out and summoned a bright blade to his hand. The red glow illuminated the gym before the lights came fully on. Oliver stood before him, and Mr. Bates gestured with the red weapon. "Do you accept this offer, Oliver Byrne?" "I accept it, Taiki." Kneel. Oliver went down to one knee and felt the heat of the bright blade over the back of his head. Then, though I am no longer a Bellator, I, Jackson Bates, do hereby vow to educate you in the ways of power, might, justice, pain, and fury. All life must be ordered, with each one in their place. The vigor is power, and in its potentials is freedom. A vice's duty is to elevate the brotherhood by elevating themselves. In battle waits ferocity. In victory waits dominance. In death waits the future of the vice. Novice Oliver, you may rise. Oliver rose, and Tyke Jackson's bright blade snapped shut. What first, Tyke? Miss Diaz, if you don't mind, you as well. He sat cross-legged on the wood floor, and Oliver sat across from him. Selina sat with them, and they formed a triangle. Rory timidly approached, but Mr. Bates didn't address him, so he sat off to the side and watched as their math teacher began to teach something radically different. Close your eyes. Now, imagine a circle split into the 3 colors, red, yellow, and blue. You have trained in the blue, Bairu, the might. Reach out to it, and imagine taking it in your hands, like trying to grab paint. Ah, there. I can sense you've tapped into it. What do you feel? Oliver could see it in his mind. The more he focused, the more it felt real. He could almost feel the sensation of paint on his fingers. His arms were out in front of him, he realized, and as he moved his hands around, the tingle spread through his fingers. The sensation of being covered in paint extended to his whole arms, like it was running up against gravity. Eventually, he felt it on his legs and chest and head as well. I feel strong, brave, like I can't be beaten, like no one will ever hurt my friends or family. He clenched his fists. His eyes opened as a swell of power flowed through him. He looked down and saw his muscles bulge. Oh, wow, so that's how Marcel does it, he thought. Very good, Oliver. Now up! Bates threw a bright blade at him, and the boy caught it with amazingly fast reflexes. His finger found the button naturally, and the next moment, Bates's red one came in swinging. Selina screamed, but Oliver leapt up and blocked the first blow, then the second, then the third one that came at his legs. The next series of blows were deflected, and Oliver found himself practically running backward. His arms were moving faster than he had ever moved before. Finally, Mr. Bates let up, and Oliver stood in his usual fighting stance, the one he had learned from Taekwondo and used in the cathedral. Now, do you see how much easier fighting is when you are practicing a potential? Rory was hollering wildly, jumping up and down. Dude, that was amazing! He was screaming over and over. He ran over to Oliver, who was still frozen in his stance. You crossed the gym in less than 3 seconds! Oliver's lungs swelled with the deep breaths he was taking with Bairu. His fingers twitched, like he was ready to move again in the barest fraction of a second. He was not winded or sweaty or tired. He had never felt so powerful. Selina also came over, a big smile on her face. Ollie, look at your blade! He had hardly noticed it before now. It was blue. Did I just choose a potential? He asked. Not exactly, said Mr. Bates. You can practice Bairu one moment and Grendu or Yindir or Razzir at any other moment. When Selina begins to teach you Yindir, you will learn how to switch between them in the midst of practice. But for now, sit again and let go of Bairu. The group returned to the center of the gym and took their seats once more. Oliver had noticed that when he intentionally tried to release the blue, his bright blade had gone back to the bright white a moment before he retracted it. Now, once again, we view the 3 colors, red, yellow, and blue, Razzir, Yindir, and Bairu. Rory gasped from off to the side and yelled, Bro, the weird names start with the same letters as the colors! Bates sighed. Very astute, Rory. Now please be quiet. Sorry. Oliver, reach out and touch Razzir, but cautiously. It can be aggressive. Oliver reached out and dipped one finger into the proverbial red. In his mind, a hiss of heat sizzled, and it began to tug at him. Where Bairu had gently crept up to cover him, Razzir hissed as it leapt up and tried to engulf him and drag him in. With only the slightest touch, it couldn't dominate him, But Oliver knew if he reached it with no hesitation, it would overtake him immediately. The hardest part was, he sort of enjoyed the feeling it gave him. "There it is," Bates said, though his voice had turned to more of a satisfied hum. "Do you feel it?" "Yes," Oliver said. It's aggressive, like you said." "It is. Can you sense me in there with you?" And just then he could. Mr. Bates was there, from within Razzir. His presence was like a boiling, bubbling rage just under the surface of the red. The feeling the whole scenario gave him was the overwhelming desire to break something. He felt Selena's hand on his arm and realized that every muscle in his body was clenched. "Do not take it all," said Bates. His teeth were clenched, and somehow Oliver sensed him emerge partway out of the red. He was trying to keep himself under control. "Razzir is used when you need the power to annihilate your enemies utterly. You are not concerned about anything other than the battle before you and the destruction of your foes. If you allow it to consume you, it will overtake you in an uncontrollable rage. You will be at your strongest, but also at your most vulnerable, since you will not be thinking clearly or planning your strategy. Everything and everyone in your path will be given over to death." By this point, the red paint sensation had made its way up Oliver's arm. It was warm, even hot, and he felt the need to move, lash out, hit or kick something. It was just as much power and strength as Byru, but with less control and more of a releasing of inhibitions. Just as Byru meant nothing would ever harm his friends and family, Razzir meant that nothing could stand in his way. It was a noticeable and a potent difference. When Mr. Bates receded out of his senses, Oliver opened his eyes. Mr. Bates's face was red, like he was in a sauna, and Oliver noticed steam coming off his shoulders and the top of his head. As he watched, Mr. Bates's face grew light again, and the steam stopped. "We're not going to fight in Razzir today, are we?" Oliver asked. His hand was squeezed, and he noticed that Selena was holding on to it. Mr. Bates shook his head. "No, for I fear you would not survive it. I can control it quite well, but if you enter a berserker rage so early in your training, you may never find your way out. Your friends and I would either be forced to kill you, or you would be consumed by vigor madness." Oliver's eyes grew wide. "What's vigor madness?" "You will learn that later, my boy," he told him somberly. "Needless to say, before we proceed further, we must do 2 things. "What things?" "1. We must ask Dominus Holly to teach you proper meditation. If you fall into any kind of vigor madness, or have damaged your mind or body with one of the potentials, you are able to heal most of those wounds using the right kind of meditation." "And, what's number 2? Mr. Bates turned to Selena. She shuddered and nodded. "Number 2 is Yindir."